Maybe. Good morning. Good day to be alive. Every day is a good day to be alive. Well, for the most part. How are you, Joe? Josie? Josie. Not Josie. Josie sounds like Josie and the Pussycats. Red day for a lot of stocks yesterday turned into a green day today, and then vice versa. Kind of saw a flip-flop. Not really seeing anything particularly great or bad about AMC. It's really just kind of a mixed bag this morning. We'll see. I made some comments in the Discord about my position and what I was doing and why I was doing it. I think maybe there was a tendency to be a little bit overzealous here for upside. I mean, there's nothing wrong about going up. I made good money on AMC and making some good money on some others. But this setup is kind of odd. So it reminds me of what happened. It's going to be an odd example, maybe, because I understand that, like, if I say something like this, people are going to be like, what are you talking about? But it reminds me of what happened when GME went up going into June last year, and how after that first pump that we had, it came back down and went back up again. And after it had recovered, there was a bit of, maybe I should just show you because it'd be easier to see it. Oh, thanks, Jason. You don't have to, but I appreciate it. You can fight against the tide. I think of everything in life just like YouTube likes and subscribes, probably ebb and flow, right? So easy come, easy go, things come and go. This kind of move right here, sort of what it reminded me of. We have a, because like I had massive influx of likes and subscribe at one point. And then over time, the people that kind of did it because they think that they're going to get one thing and then they don't get that, they just kind of unsubscribe or whatever. So I see that as pretty normal though. Unless you're constantly providing like exactly what everybody in the world wants. It's not exactly based on a science, right? That's why I don't talk about it, because I just don't really care that much about it. I feel like that could be a goal for some people, I guess, if monetization was necessary. And it was for me to some degree at the time to keep doing what I wanted to do. Gosh darn it, cat. If you can't keep your drool to yourself, it's disgusting. Cat's drooling all over me. Yeah, to some degree. But I mean, who's to blame them? I'm not pointing the finger at anybody in particular. It's just kind of like, I don't know. It's like any kind of celebrity or popularity. It's finite. It's got a time limit on it. You don't take it to your grave, Not really. Anyways, so GME right here, back in, it was back in June on the 5th. So I remember this being like a situation where it had already pushed up twice. And the first time it got pretty close to being overbought. The second time it became really overbought on a lot of time frames. This is the hourly that we're looking at. And I recall at the time thinking that when we were down here that it would come back up and it might break out. I had a couple different options because we were talking about this being potentially a double diamond. And so we were thinking like maybe in this situation right here, if it didn't cross up and over, which it did, then it would come back down and then go. And it really wasn't being bearish. I think at the time, if I recall, maybe I'm wrong. I thought there was like an FOMC thing or something here, but maybe I'm wrong about that. Probably, because that doesn't seem right. But if there is, okay, that's probably what I was talking about. Anyways, so sometimes you get that jump, even though it's on maybe an apparent kind of weakness, and you're not really sure what's going to happen. That second push up here didn't really have a lot of divergence or anything. And then it does the same thing again. And there's nothing particularly wrong about this. In fact, this is what you want to see in like a bullish setup. Is you want to see it come across and then build out with some strength and then develop on top of the creek and then push away. So like coming off this top, it came down, it developed a little bit of strength on the bottom, jumped over the creek and then pushed away. But it's kind of doing it on like what would maybe be called diminishing returns. Like this second move is huge, but there's also jumping over a pretty major support region. But then the last move is significantly weaker by comparison. If you look at like how high we pushed, I think percentage-wise it was still a big move, and it went in extended hours. I think it went a lot further. But this is just one of those examples of like, as it's going up, it's kind of showing here and there like signs of weakness. It's not particularly horrible. It's just doing things like not coming back fully to check a creek. You know, it's kind of taking off and becoming overbought. And I'm not seeing that strength underlying in volume that I'd really like. There's a large amount of volume here on the backside on June 6th, and then that was going into the whole Roaring Kitty thing. And I don't really need to get into that. But I think you get what I'm saying. Like basically, in this particular setup, you know, we've got a lot of different possibilities with the creek jumps, but it ultimately is continuing to advance, even if the, you know, indicators are getting a little overblown. And I'm feeling the same way about AMC. So it has some good things, and then there's some not so good things. Like this is the 15-minute. This isn't like the hourly or anything. So what happened here was we got that push out, and I kind of already deleted it on the chart, but this was something that we had talked about as pretty decent likelihood if it could break back above 320, and it did. And so we got a nice push up with big volume, but a lot of the time frames became very overbought. I think all the way up to 4 hour, it was overbought, at least by yesterday. So on this second push, you get the same thing, but there's no creek test. Do you see that? It's like it jumps over and it builds apparent strength on a support, but it doesn't actually come back down. And even in my drawing, like I thought it would come back down and pop. And what's weird is that in extended hours, if you look at AMC, it did do this. It actually went over, dropped down, and then pushed. So it looks almost better in extended hours with extended hours on here. We can turn it on just to show you what I mean. And you'll see what I'm talking about. Like it has that backup right here, and then it advances in a kind of almost like another creek jump, like a second creek jump. So it's kind of odd because with extended hours on, this actually looks pretty good. It looks much healthier. Like, oh, it's done everything it needs to do. It's jumping, it's pushing. Again, RSI coming down, trending down the whole time, and I think that's not a great sign. It's either that she needs some time to cool and they're kind of cooling the jets as we go, which happens. I mean, it's not a impossibility. We've seen that during some bigger run-ups at different times, just to kind of reset the, you know, relative strength index is just one of many indicators. But in this case, like, it's pretty universally looking kind of weak. And I said yesterday that I just didn't think it was very strong. This volume is garbage right here. It's anemic. There's one massive push beginning of the day, Wednesday, and then really there's like very little low to average volume. I mean, it's not this ain't like significantly great. Now, if you take it on like the daily or the 4-hour, some of these candles look healthier. There's more volume in there, but it just doesn't look that hot to me. It looks like a stock that kind of went too far too fast. And I think I would just say right now that what this looks like is mostly just short covering volume, not actually like smart money buy-in. Now this push right here, that's a big amount of volume, but again, like you got to look at the data. This goes from 320 all the way up to 343. And if you look back from that region at 320 up to 343, that's the big drop down ledge. There's two major pushes here. It's really this move here. So it's not even like impossible that is really what's in view here, is like a shorts covering from the opposite side, even though there's a lot of volume. Yes. And I'm not saying it's all short volume. I just think that kind of like massive push with very little volume is kind of strange to me. But it's also one of those things where, like GME, like we were talking about, just as an example, yeah, like it has this kind of like anemic kind of push where it drops back down to nothing. If it can find its way back up and hold support, it's not like I'm going to sit here and be like, oh, it's going to go down no matter what. No, like right now support is above 350. We've made 2 pushes above it this morning. We haven't held it. Maybe not 350, more like 352. And I was looking at the fib extension, and the fib extension was, well, the last big pump on AMC was back in before the earnings drop, right? The dilution announcement or whatever it was. Or maybe not the earnings drop, but the dilution announcement. That would be the last time I would say we had like a pump. And it was kind of similar, where you had like really decently high volume only on those push-ups. And like, that's not really what you want to see. It's kind of like few and far between, like each of these push-ups. This is a bit of a weird example though, because it's very strange. I don't know. This is kind of unique in my opinion. But I mean, you really can't compare it to May, which obviously has astronomically high volume. But on the big picture, it's kind of the same thing, because it has this massive push, massive dump, right? Huge amount of selling above the top here, and then it's pretty much just resetting volume for the next few months and not really doing anything exciting. So I don't know. I don't think it's bad. I don't want you to say like, I don't want to sit here and be like, oh, it's bad, it's going up. That's not what I mean. But I mean, look at it. It's on the hourly. You can see it right here. It's overbought. This doesn't look particularly horrible on the hourly. It doesn't look like divergent anyways. Every other time frame below the hourly, it looks divergent to me, which just says that it's weak. It's kind of weaker as it's pushing up. This is not unusual though. So, yeah, from 238, you mean? From that low? We can go check. Yeah, I mean, that volume was pretty weak. And it builds out a range above before it actually takes off. I think that's a good comparison, because that comparison makes more sense to me. It's like, yeah, if you're pushing up here, if you get overcooked, you could take a breather going into earnings and then potentially see a bigger run up after the fact. And that's sort of what happened back here, right? You got really overbought, and then this is on the 2-hour right here, and it chills out, kind of wraps around the 50, and we see that accumulation range build up, which was easy to identify as a buy-in. But if you were buying on this top here, I think that would have been a different story. If you were like, oh, you're trying to make an argument that, oh, it pushed up, it's going to keep going above 350, which is kind of, funnily enough, like kind of where we are now, right? It's like, oh, well, we pushed back up, so we're going to just keep going. Well, no, I mean, you're going to have a backup and build out. So we didn't take a lower path yesterday, which tells me that we're probably going to have to chill out a bit going into earnings. And if we don't, it's going to be really stretched thin by the time we hit earnings. So Yeah, I think it's going to go to 4, but I don't think it's going to get there. The way we've traveled, I'm kind of doubtful it's going to do it, you know, right this second. Does that make sense? So, like, if you were to keep going right now, you're basically going to be overbought all the way up to the 4 hour, which is pretty significant. We haven't been overbought on the 4 hour since November. That's pretty significant. I mean, that's back here when we were at a top. You don't want to get overbought. And frankly, like if you look at this, it looks pretty meh right now. Really don't want to get overbought that quickly. This is a 2 hour and you're already there. We were overbought way up here at 522. Now we're getting overbought now at, a lower price. It doesn't seem right. That's not a great thing. So take it for what it is. Basically, it just looks like we're kind of pumping on fumes to me. So for me, I looked at this fib extension yesterday and I was like, yeah, I don't know if we're going to break 350 till either Tuesday or, right at earnings. And I just don't see it. Yeah, I don't see it happening today and tomorrow. That's just my opinion. Now, if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. And you know how it is. You got to take things as they come. So I'm just trying to read the chart as I see it. So the way I see it, this is overstretched. We've got some issues. And I don't see this morning's price action as particularly bullish. It looked kind of bearish to me. And mainly because we had a double SOW. So that's a sign of weakness. And it was pretty obvious. So yesterday I actually exited all my trades on AMC in order to make room so I could take that cash. Because I was up like 25 to 17%, which is fine. I mean, if I had bought at the bottom, I probably would have been up like 100%. I didn't buy at the perfect bottom, so, you lose some of that. But, yeah, I mean, I exited my trade yesterday on the second push-up, the first and the second push-up. The first one happened. I watched the second one build out on that volume. And when the second one happened and pushed up to 350, I pulled the trigger. And I posted those trades because, so like I had 25% exit here at like 353 or something. I had a really good exit. The second one was probably like 348 or something like that. Basically, it just didn't look right. And I was like, yeah, this is looking suspect. Like there's no follow through on that push. We built out, so I was like, I'm going to take advantage if it pushes up again to 350, and I'll probably just exit. And if I didn't, then I would just probably, again, at that point, decide whether or not I want to average down or just take what gains I still had. And I still had gain. It wasn't like it had never went below, never went red again. But I got out because I just didn't see it as strong. And I posted that. I said, I think it's going to bonk its head on 350 and it may not go forward. So this morning, what we see first, and it might be a little difficult on this chart, but first we see an upthrust of 354. And then it goes, and this candle's a 15-minute candle. All 4 of these 15-minute candles have closed beneath 352. And that's the 1854 on this extension. The 1618 is 345, and that's kind of where we are. So we're sandwiched between 2 pretty popular extensions on that first move, which would suggest to me that this is a pretty natural, it's a natural place to sort of stop. This is a very common Elliott wave target, and really it's sandwiched between the 2 most common, the 168 and the 1618. And so I think, 1786 and 1618. I don't think it's really a big deal if it chills out now. So seeing divergence on MACD, on RSI, I'm seeing weakness in volume. I'm seeing push-ups that are not closing above this top. And then this morning, it gets the up thrust and it drops all the way through both the ice, which is right here. This was the ascending triangle that you had. It drops all the way through that. And then it also drops the uptrend. Right, so this is the steepest uptrend we have, and it drops through the previous creek. And arguably you could say, well, maybe it didn't quite drop through it, maybe it just kind of touches it. But I think those 2 tops and then the place where it found support, which was around 344, I think those are the critical spots. So I'm looking at this like a double sign of weakness, and I'm like, yeah, I don't know how else to read that. Like it pushed down below both, and now it's just coming back up to distribute again, and it teased out like a head fake would. It teased out like, oh, we're going to run, right? You get those people buying in, you see the volume picking up, thinking that it's going to break back out and go, and really it's already on its way back. So yeah, I'm not holding on to this, and it's not like one size fits all. We could come back later today and find out that for whatever reason this double dipped here and then came back up, and bulls had to come back and it broke out again, but that's pretty unusual at this point. I think what we'll see is it bounce. Ow! God, cat. You can't sit on my lap if you're going to dig your claws in anytime I move. Jeez Louise, man. I'm bleeding. So ridiculous. Sorry about that. I was trying to be nice to my cat and let her sit in my lap because I don't usually like her sitting in my lap while I'm doing this, but that's why, because she flips out sometimes, as cats do. So yeah, I don't know if that's going to be ultimately a nail in the coffin or if it really is just cooling off and we're just going to chop and then run later. But to me, it just has that same feeling that I got going June into like GME. That was the example that I used, where it's just lacking something, and it doesn't seem to have regard to, in regular trading hours anyways, and not the extended hours, because it did it in extended hours. It never came back and hit this outer wall. I find that to be kind of strange. So if this were to pull back, where would it go at this point? I don't think it's likely it's going to drop all the way back down. It could go to 320. I don't think it's likely going to go all the way back to 311. It's not impossible. We know there's a really tiny gap down there, but I don't know if it's going to go that low, and I would have to do a retracement. That might be like a 786 retracement here, but I think what's more likely is just going back towards the bottom of this greater channel, which would make more sense to me at this particular point in time. And we'll see, like I said, it's not like set in stone, but I would suggest that it probably like bounces down out here and heads back towards more than likely this 330, 340 area. It makes sense because you look at where we took off on, I guess it was like noon yesterday. It was like that level right there at 340 is pretty significant. And we did buy off of it heavily. Going backwards, you can see why that 336, 340 area is very significant. When we came down, that's really where we found a lot of supports. You can see it pretty, again, very clearly back here, that's where we were trying to hold supports. So that's the first likely stop. If we lose 345 again, all right, then I think it's almost definitely going to come down to that zone, and then there's a gap. And so you have some things here that are maybe clear, and then other things are not as clear. And I'm not as clear about the gap right this second. I think it probably doesn't matter. So if the argument is, well, it's got to come back down and hit this 320 because that's a more significant floor, then I would agree. Yeah, it's more significant and it's a better floor. It is. It's ultimately like where you really want to have support. And again, we didn't check it here, and we definitely left behind another gap here. So it's certainly not impossible that we get some kind of deep retracement going into, again, earnings or whatever, down to 320s or something like that. Again, I don't really know if it's like what we call the word maybe necessary, but I would suggest that it's probable, again, because it was left behind. Nothing's tested here at all. We didn't back up here, and we didn't back up here. So we are doing that in a way that's kind of unusual. A breakout at this point would be pretty strong, I think, to for what it's worth. If we came back above one more time, and held it at 350, and we're kind of pinned between these levels right now. We're pinging between them. It would be pretty strong because I know you guys are like, well, you just said it would be weak. Well, like the move itself, by itself, would be strong. I don't think its follow through would be strong. I think it'd be likely to try to punch to near the 360, 370 area, because that's really the next level that we would have any kind of resistance is up top. So I think there's a probability that if it does punch up, it goes pretty far, pretty fast, like hits up to 360s, 370s. After that, I'm not confident that it's strong at all. I think you'd probably crap out. So to me, this looks like an M cross that jumped up again and again, and it's trying to kind of hold it a third time here. So like 1, 2, 3. I'm not so sure it's going to be able to do it. And that weakness this morning was really the thing that kind of made me scratch my head. Like, I wonder, So it wouldn't be pretty if it breaks 345. Let's just put it that way. With these divergences set up the way they are, it's ready and geared to like start a sell down. So it's really just kind of a catch-22 moment, I suppose, double-edged sword. You're right between these two ranges. You can see on the chart, it's kind of sandwiched between them. And it hasn't broken down just yet. So it did test that trend. It's bouncing. I'd watch this ice level. If it can't breach it again, especially around 350, I think it's just going to turn right back down. It is consolidating kind of weird like, so let's zoom in on that because I can't see it on this time frame. Yeah. I don't know. It's not horrible. What's weird is like, if I saw this outside of this upthrust and downward motion, if it had done this, let's say it went down to 345 and it never went up high, and I saw that bounce out, I'd probably be pretty bullish actually, because it looks like a nice hard bottom. And I'm thinking like, I'm looking at this 3 minute like, yeah, if I didn't see that upthrust and the downward move, this looks good. It looks like a dip that was just to get it oversold. It just came too high and went too low in one move this morning. So that's the thing about the markets though. And I was looking at that yesterday on IWM, because you can see like on one time frame. Hey, good to see you. Welcome. Sorry I didn't see that crusher. Yeah, I mean, you can see on like IWM yesterday, I was watching it and I was like, I kind of want to swing trade this really short term. So I bought something that expires on Friday, and I traded it. And when I traded it with the expectation that it was going to go up. I'm done with this trade. So this wasn't done live. This was done during yesterday's market hours. And I talked about, I posted it in the Discord and said, if it kind of breaches up above this 223 level, I'm probably going to enter. And I watched it drop, but I was like, I don't think it's going to drop. I think it's just a fake out. I think they're selling it down into close. If it doesn't drop beneath the floor, I'm not getting out. So I actually bought in yesterday around 223, and I got out this morning at 225 on a really short-term swing. It was a 25% trade, something like that. Yeah. I mean, it was literally like $1 contract to $1.25 or something like that. And the reason that I thought that was going to happen was because of short-term. The short-term looked like it didn't go far enough. So I was watching this move yesterday, and it had this massive push already. And you're like, well, why would you get in at the very top? Well, sometimes if you want a piece of it, you want a piece of it, And I watched it, and I was like, this is not over yet. It's got to go up higher. And I looked at the targets that it were going for, and it's pretty clear that it was going to head towards 225. So the trade was a $2 trade, And ultimately, like looking at this, maybe it was like $1.50 really, but I was like, so I'm gonna go something super short term and just trade danger like overnight, and just hold it. But it was like short term, it looks pretty good. Long term, it does not look particularly great. Kind of looks terrible. And so this is just an example. I'm just telling you because I was looking at it yesterday. Sometimes you're gonna have, like, this isn't particularly awesome. The 1 hour looks okay. It kind of looks like maybe it's gonna try to go up to that hourly, up at 226. It might be a creek breakout if it can manage to hold this right here. It may even do it again right there if it can break out again. It's like a secondary rising creek right there. So, you know, I'm in it really bullish if the bigger indicators turn around near 226 or something. We might get there today. I don't know. We may not. But for now, I'm like, this didn't really look too hot. It was like starting to cross up on the 1 hour, and you get to like 4 hour, it never got oversold. It's kind of sitting around 50. To me, it looks a lot like a flag, which is what you'd expect here. If this is an even atom bottom, this could be like a flagging motion. The problem is that this flagging motion is like widening, and it's making the same top but lower bottoms. It's a very strange pattern. So if it doesn't hit the bottom again, like if the widening doesn't continue down to like 217 and it reverses and breaks the top, it's going to be really strong. And then you're going to have a really good chance that this is going to go all the way up to 241. So there's a $10 trade in it. So I'm starting to watch it more closely now because it's coming closer to that time. Previously, I just kind of was watching it and just failing it to break out. So I'm going to watch it carefully. You know, I'm going to trade it if I think it's a good trade. But right now, it's kind of in like this position where it had dumped back beneath the prevailing downtrend, and then it was sort of struggling back up. Again, shorter time frames looked a bit more bullish, but longer time frames I'm like, meh, really anything could happen here. And it's trending down on some time frames. It just didn't look too hot. So you're like, you got to trade the time frame that you want to trade in. I feel like AMC is a good example of that right now. Like, yeah, it's possible this was going to go back up, but once you get to that top, there's not another trade there based on everything we know. And the same thing right here. It's like this could go back up, but if it doesn't break back above the ice, and it didn't, it actually just kind of hooked right on it on 350. And that's what I was saying. It's going to go back down to 345. If this starts breaking through, especially right here now at 342, it's over, you know? Like, it's going to do a deeper retracement. There's a lot of reasons to come back. So it's not over like the move itself. I say something like it's over and people are like, oh my gosh, it's going to go to zero or something. It's like, nah. What I mean is that it's time for like a bigger cool off. And I do think that's probably going to be likely into earnings. So I'm out of those positions for now. I mean, pretty much as good of a trade as I can get on that auto reaction type deal here. And then now we're going to see where it kind of comes back to find some support. There's a gap level around 330. There's another massive potential for support down here at 317. I'm going to get rid of these fib extensions. I don't feel like they're super helpful right now. And I'm going to probably do like a fib retracement instead. Yeah, I think that would be better, considering we might be in retracement mode. Yeah, I mean, there it is. So that 618 is 322. I mean, it's right where it should be. And then the 0.5 is at 330, like 328 to 334 is the 382 to 0.5. So I think what would be wise if you're going to trade it again would be to just kind of wait for this to kind of work itself out sideways. Because no matter what happens, there's going to be new creeks that form. There's going to be new setups. And there'll be new entry points. You're like, well, I'm screwed because this. Look, sometimes I'm not on here and I'm not really looking to try to trade live like all the time. Sometimes I'm not on here and I'm on the Discord just posting what I'm doing. Usually I'm trying to be transparent, but at the end of the day, like, and you guys know this because you're all grown people, you enter a trade and you assume that risk yourself. So if you get to a place where it's like, hey man, it's starting to look like it's topping off, you don't need me to tell you that, hopefully. And you learn that through just practice, and you don't want to like hold it through a top like this. There's nothing I can do about it, Like, and I'm sorry if that's you, but we kind of have the same thing with Fang, and I feel bad about it because Fang really set up very, very strong, like it was ready to go into this final low here. And I had two markers. One was at 157 and one was at 155. Now the 157 just melted, and then the 155 held today, but it still looks like garbage, right? And it really looks like it could just keep going down. And this is one of those things where it's like, man, I don't know how that happened. But all the work you put into something could be for nothing, It could be done in vain. And I did a lot of work on Fang. And I think this is almost a technically perfect setup for a potential wave back up towards the upper 170s and a breakout of this level around 180. And there's plenty of evidence that could happen. But man, like this had like a massive pullback down on strength indexes. It had jumped what to me is obviously like what we would call like a creek, like a resistance level, right? I mean, it's right there. It's undeniably there. But the problem is that it went kind of as it's doing this on RSI. It's not really. It's leaving gaps open. There's like two major gaps that were left on this push up to 164, which is technically, breaking out. But the issue is that that's happening on a downtrend and you're leaving gaps. And the only way to go back and fill those gaps with any kind of hope of support is just to kind of have basically like a double bottom or a slightly lower low. The issue being, of course, that it made a little bit of a weakness, and it did, on this slide down. You can see like it's continuing making lower lows as it's trying to react back up. Volume here is not really in question. The volume's super high, and I think that's a good thing. But if you're looking at something like this and you're saying, well, the stock's kind of looks like it's trying to turn around, but it's failing to do so with kind of gusto, and you're seeing these massive retracements, you just sort of have to divert to simple thinking, in my opinion. And simple thinking right now is just to say that this is still bullish divergent on bottoms. And I think it's up to 4 hours it's like that. Like these are turning up on the bottoms. So even though this is really nasty looking, there is a swing happening in momentum. It's just very subtle. And sometimes that's the case. Back here when it hit recent bottoms in December, these are very, very, very small. They don't look particularly noticeable unless you're really staring at them and like kind of pinpointing them. These are really small divergences. Most people would look at this, see this kind of pop and sell down and say maybe it's like a throwback, right, on RSI, because it looks like it's coming all the way back down. And it did. We got oversold again. But at the end of the day, like that's the divergence. And sometimes it's subtle, sometimes it's huge. In this case, if it happens, it's going to be really subtle. It's not going to look very, obvious. It's there. It's like a 1, 2, 3, 4 bottoms, pushing. It's going to have to kind of move, really make a stand and push out and hold a support. So this trade is a very risky trade because you're not really seeing that strength yet. You haven't made those advances yet. I think it's going to do it, but I'm also like, hey, anything can happen in the market. And if it doesn't happen here, it rejects for whatever reason, it can't hold these markers, then it's not a good trade. So I feel kind of bad about it because you're like posting a chart that you're saying, hey, this is a really good chart. And I think it is. And I'm not going to get rid of it. But it's already come significantly lower, by $3. I mean, that's a pretty decent amount than what you expected. And you're watching it like, man, I mean, it is technically like backing up to this creek, but there's potential here that it doesn't sort of slow down and keep going. I hope it doesn't, but same deal right here. You can see this is, if this holds and can reverse and break back out of that downtrend, This is 100% a divergence right here on the 4-hour. It just has to hold and break back out. And then it's actually better because on the lower time frames, all 4 of these bottoms are divergent. But on the 4-hour, this is the only one that has potential to be divergent still. And you guys are like, yeah, but what about how low this thing has gotten before? Well, there's the risk, right? Are we looking for a double bottom then? I don't know. Maybe. If it is lower and it makes a lower RSI, then we may have a macro divergence going back to December. We'll see. If the price comes down and the RSI comes down lower, it could be the case. We will see. I don't know if I said that in the right way, but GME is, and I'm kind of just bouncing through them right now. GME is looking okay. Of the two, I'd say GME looks more like what we doodled maybe on Wednesday. AMC went higher than expected, and now it's having like a nasty little pullback. I won't say nasty, not yet, but it might become that way. GME kind of went the way we thought it was going to go. I said that, it's possible this could just go up, but the way that this had positioned itself with that gap just seemed more likely it was going to come down, chop here, potentially drop again. So I haven't moved this. This is where I thought it might be. I don't know for sure that this is where it's going to stop or whatever. The idea here is pretty sound, that it comes back to try to fill that gap. I would not be surprised if we got like a double bottom and then pushed out on Tuesday. Or maybe even a slightly lower low, depending on what happens here on GME over the next day. The only way this comes back up is it has to come all the way back up above 27 again and then break out. So did I exit my GME positions? No. They're different than my AMC positions in this regard because GME hasn't made the run yet, whereas AMC made a pretty massive push. To me, that got overextended. So I'm going to go ahead and let it do its thing and see if I can find a good entry point again. GME never really did that. It kind of just pushed over the top, and now it's coming back to settle down. I prefer this kind of chart to AMC's chart, to be honest, because I like being able to see the move and see the backup, and I like to see the support build before it runs. That's an easier trade for me, personally, as a trader. I think some people really like the crazy high volatility, but I don't like holding a stock while it's running up on weakness. Like that to me feels like I'm playing a game of chicken, and I don't like that. I like to see it go ahead and make an advancement and then back up and find support, make an advancement, back up and find support. So that's kind of what I'm hoping for here. And it is a breakout, guys. So if you want to be bullish on GME, like I'm with you. Unless it comes back beneath this kind of brighter blue line here, I think GME is really bullish right now, and I think it's going to have a big push. Like I said, I think it'll come up to at least 30 area, 29.90s, possibly up to 32. So I'm not at all bearish on GME for the short term. I think that's a very strong possibility here going into mid to late February, and I think we talked about mid-February frequently, and we're breaking out. It's mid-February, and we're breaking out. So as long as this holds, it can back up, fill the gap, over the next day or two. It's still really bullish. I mean, and this is where you want to be bullish, I think, in the market, when it's, to a lot of people, feeling like it's not going anywhere, but to us, we're like, no, it's making advances. Check that EMA on the 180 hourly here. It pushed to this top. It hasn't shown a higher high yet. That's the only thing I would maybe gripe about. But it is, my higher high, I'm just talking about these recent peaks. It just hasn't yet. That's the only thing I might be a little concerned about. Other than that, it looks really solid. So if it's going to run, this is descriptive, right? Not necessarily prescriptive. It's going to run. It needs to make an advancement back over 2770 with some strength, and it should just go. But I think it might start with one more downward drop to get to that It's probably going to look silly too. I bet it'll like chop weird. If we get down to that gap fill by the end of the day tomorrow would be really good. So maybe we'll end the day around 2450s. What if it just reverses? What if, Is there a chance that it just reverses? It doesn't go fill the gap right now? Yes. What does that look like? Kind of exactly what we already drew. Like it's this yellow marker here. It really was representative of what would have been the first jump, not the second, but I left it on the chart and it's the same jump again. So you could use it twice. It needs to come over this ice level here, which was drawn back on January 21st and the 27th at 2633 and 2663 respectively. And there's a gap from it. It pushed that, which is fine. But that's really where it needs to go above now. And I should actually make this higher like that. It needs to come above that at this point in order to continue. That would be a jump of the EMA as well. So do I think it's going to happen now, or do I think it's going to happen, maybe on a short week next week? Probably a short week next week. I don't know. Friday moves are kind of unusual in the market, and it's not like you're like, no, it's not. No, they kind of are. If you look at like statistically, most of your bigger moves are Mondays, Tuesdays. There's some that happen. Actually, I think on AMC it's like Mondays and Wednesdays tend to be our better days, and then Thursday, Friday tends to be garbage for AMC, and usually like we buy up and then sell down. And I think that might be universally true, but in the market, basically because of max pain. So if you're not already in a trade, I don't know if this will be a great time until about tomorrow. That's why I'm waiting on AMC. I'm kind of curious if it can get pretty low to going into Tuesday. I'm curious to see what happens. I think that would be a good thing for us. So I would be buying it again. I haven't talked about AMD, so I don't know how many of you guys are actually interested in this trade or have even taken part in it at all. So yesterday I had on my chart the potential that we come down low to about 104.83. That was like the better marker for me. We didn't do it. Now I'm a bit concerned that we do it on like this pivot that I have. I'm like, uh-oh, what if it like pivots down now and goes down into the 19th? It could be a much longer-winded scenario because it didn't go down first and it left another gap. And I'm like, well, great. Why do we need that? We don't need that. Right now, it just looks like the recovery and the buyback in from this massive drop down. And you can see it's kind of building back out. There's like a wave going up here that's trying to build some strength. Doesn't look particularly great, on some time frames. I think below 1 hour, it looks like it's overbought on like the 30-minute. The EMA that's most commonly been hit lately has been this hourly on this trend. So if you look back, the hourly 180 was frequently tapped before returning back down. We're pretty close to it now. We didn't even hit it on the earnings day, and it went to like 120. So, a chop here going into Tuesday could lead you to it, which could imply that there may be a drop. The trajectories on this one were super, super tight, and they're definitely indicating that there's a massive pivot on Wednesday the 19th. Could it be that that's going to go right up into that? Possibly. It happens to be a ramp, then yeah, it will. But I also think there's just sort of like that same rule of thumb that I was talking about with AMC. You kind of have to look at each time frame individually and then compare them. And I think it's got some underlying issues that could haunt it, perhaps, if it tries to advance too quickly. I don't know. Maybe it's just an indication that we're going to trade between 100 and 130 for a while, and we're going to come back down later. Maybe, maybe the reason that's left there at 108 is because that's going to be like a significant marker in the future. I don't know yet. I can tell you that when I look at AMD, I'm still very bullish on it. I think it's trying to turn up, but it has some issues, and certainly like the way I've drawn this out, I think it's as tight as I can make it. But a reaction here to 120 that kind of fizzles out would not be out of the question either. And I'm curious about these trajectories being so tight. Like, is it really going to push all the way up to 136, or is this just, again, kind of like a localized pivot, and we're going to see that it actually hits, 120 here and doesn't go any further, and then starts retracing. And I've got one scenario like that because I was thinking about this is a floor at 112. There's certainly a possibility this could come back down again, to hit that gap after maybe pushing up too far, too fast kind of thing. I could see that. And coming all the way back down to like 108 and then breaking out much later. And this requires patience. So if you're trading it now and you happen to be in a position, I'd be watching for 120 maybe, and then if it doesn't turn down sooner, and then I'd be very cautious, especially if it comes to like this day on the 19th and it's still at 120. I'm not expecting it to just pop up. I think it's very possible this could be like the middle of a larger wave. And so this could end up being like a 1, right, with a backup 2. And the 2 could be a really deep backup, which is often the case. So that would probably present itself as like a push up again from, well, I guess the bottom was like 106.50 to 120, and then back down to 108. And I think that's deeper than an 854, but I think it's possible. It's just slightly higher high, and then it does a extension 3. So I still think those targets will be met for a lot of reasons, more than one. But again, it would not surprise me if Wednesday ends up being a top that then kind of turns into, something a little more drastic here. I'm not sure. Yeah, it would not surprise me if it came back down. Yeah, and then look at the extensions. The 1618, the 1854s, all of them are in this zone up here that we're looking for. So strange because of how accelerated it is that it's kind of doing that, and it's almost like, to me, I'm like, well, I guess if it goes back down, it's really not a bad deal. It's just that if you have that kind of acceleration, I don't usually find that to be accidental. It's very strange. Usually it gives it up at some point. Like we had that on GME, for example. We had that acceleration. It ended up being a really great target. This is one that kind of referred back to because in principle, sometimes you just get it right and those targets are met and it's like this big, amazing move, right? And we had those layup targets back here as we were coming down, but this took months of build out. And then when it finally hits, it goes right to the 27, 28 mark where a lot of these guys were pointing, right? And that's important. Obviously, we care about that it hit that. But this doesn't end up being a pivot. This ends up being a target. And then likewise, we've seen plenty of times where that's not the case, and it ends up being like an upper pivot on a wave. I don't really know if I can tell perfectly the difference between the two. I wish I could. But I have noticed that there is inconsistency there. I'm trying to iron that out as we go. And so I'm just keeping that in mind. That's the reason I'm talking about this, like two completely different scenarios instead of just sticking to one. The reason I'm talking about this acceleration like I am is because there are odd instances, like on AMC, on the macro, for example, the biggest possible picture. When you look back at that January move, the acceleration there is undeniable, but it does not represent a pivot like on the bottom of a wave, like looking opposite, like it's a circle moving around it. It represents very readily like that's the target, and it doesn't slow down ever. It doesn't just like kind of build out and then fizzle out and then build out a wave that goes back up. it really just rapidly accelerates, and every single time it's getting steeper and steeper and steeper until finally it goes, and it's just like straight up. Maybe the big key here, and I guess what I'm already sort of doing, and this is the simplest way to do it, is just kind of like, all right, maybe that's always a possibility, but you're just not going to know. Maybe I need to tell myself that, like, hey, this could just always be a possibility. And it's just one of those things where you're not going to necessarily know until it finally goes and you see the build out finish. I don't know right now. I'm critiquing myself. I don't know right now if I have a great method for that. So, yeah, I think right now it's kind of lacking. I wish I could tell the difference, but I just can't. I haven't figured it out yet. One day I'll figure it out. I mean, I've come pretty far, so I'm happy with what progress I have made, and I'm doing the best I can. There's room for growth. This is one of those things that bugs me a lot because it's one of the easier things to do. But it's hard to identify, So what I'm probably going to do is, as this moves, I'll probably start trading out of. And actually, what would be good? Would be to see this make a higher high here. I have a lot of lines on the chart right this second because I put this fib extension on here. But what would be good is to see it hit, because we left that behind and we didn't go low. I'm going to suggest that it would be positive for us to hit 120. And then if we don't go immediately, I bet this is like where it goes down. I'm just going to go ahead and doodle it because I think it's appropriate. I'm guessing that this is going to be if this is what happens, this is going to be the movement here. Because usually what you're trying to do on these waves is try to come back to hit the middle of the wave. I might have to kind of reevaluate this one later in my own time. I don't want to waste too much this time right now on it, but that looks like 27th of February. So where's this bottom at? It's pretty darn close to a halfway point. Actually, it's really close to a halfway point. So like an up down here would be really positive because this would be a push of the resistance from the top, like previous tops. Especially if it came a little bit too high, like 121, 21 or something. And then retracing back down, almost like a double bottom, gives you the fib extension back to the creek here. Yeah, it's going to be dangerous. It's kind of like an all or nothing type move because it more than likely the way this is building out, it's starting to build out that parabolic setup. So more than likely with the way this is building out, it's going to do like a parabolic finish here and just kind of go really high. But I think, man, this is tricky. I think the tendency is, it's going to come all the way up here, but I wonder if it saves it. backs up again, and then breaks out later. So I wonder if there's a way for me to determine where it would go if that happens, how that would move. I don't know. Perhaps. A lot of that would be, a lot of that would not matter if it went ahead and went back down. I think it would be actually easier to read if it went back down first, but we'll see. All right, so that's chopping back down along that. Trying to hold that trend here. You can see that really looks kind of goofy. It's like flat right there. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. It's trying to. It's buying back down to that floor at 224. But if it loses it, it's going to drop pretty quick, I think, and try to head back down towards 223.63. Can't see why it wouldn't. Talking about IWM. CRSR. Yeah, we'll kind of hit some highlights here, and we'll go through some stocks that are lesser popularity, I suppose. We'll just kind of run through them. So real quickly, ADTX broke down, just had a gap down. There's a decent buyback in here, decent volume. It got oversold on like 2 hour. It's an attempt to kind of push back up to the gap, but really like it flushed above this triangle and then back below the triangle about equal parts. So at this point, really it just looks like a double flush to me. Even if it went back up and filled the gap, that's like a 50% retracement on that drop down. It's not looking super hot. So if this was one that you kind of liked because you're like, well, maybe it goes way up. It could still happen, but it needs to have like a new build out. So we need to see it come above here and basically hold a support and then break out again. It's like a lot of little steps, right? And I think that means that it's not quite perfect as a trade. You're kind of just trading on, oh, it could do this, not like it is doing this. And that's not always the best place to be. So it need to come back up, recover. There's just a lot of questions here. So it's sort of like a double flush into a rebound. It comes back above 12 cent. A lot of volume in this move, so maybe it does happen, but until it pushes back above there, I don't really think it's an easy recommendation. So NNOX is one that I've been following for a while. And back here, I think I was starting to trade it, and I was like watching it move. And at first, I thought it was really bearish because I was like, this thing looks like garbage. It might still prove to be really bearish, so don't hold me to saying it's suddenly flip-flopped. But it is like a wedge, so it's possible if this breaks out. And I think it's had 3 tops roughly, and it's only really had maybe 2 bottoms. If you count this first one as a bottom, you could say it's a loose 3, but usually you want to see 3 bottoms, not 3 tops. So if it does go, though, I was looking at the wave count, 1, 2, 3, and I was watching those patterns. And I was like, this might just need to pop to like 9, and then it could still drop again, but it might just need that relief bounce. It's sort of an outworking of what this narrowing is doing right here. So there was like an iterative boom, 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 and I thought to myself, that looks shrinking, but it's also, it's dependent on whether it jumps the creek when it starts moving out, and it did. So you can see right here, hopefully, you guys are like, I can't see a thing, Booksy, your charts are garbage. Yeah, what else is new? I know, my charts are sometimes garbage. Spaghetti, as I call them. But it did something interesting because it I don't know if you can see, so it was building downward and it jumped the creek and it kind of pushed back low is almost what I'm talking about right here on AMD. This idea that it could jump this early creek and like push back down and not actually necessarily get a lower low, but if it advances at least this creek, then you have a decent chance that, I mean, you have a decent chance that this could be coming back down, but it's like, you also have a decent chance that this could be fairly strong afterwards. If it can make that advancement and jump the creek, who really cares if it comes back down to the floor again? It's just like a double bottom. As long as it's jumped the creek, as long as it's jumped the previous resistance, and this did. So this didn't make a higher high, and at first I was like, meh, that's not great. It only pushed up to 782. The previous high was 8. But then I was looking at it like, well, then it's like winding down in this beak formation low, and it looks like it's not going to exceed the bottom. And the bottom here is the golden pocket retracement, which would be a natural place to see it kind of form a bottom and buy back in. Look at where it is now, and you can see why I'm like, it might be, it's very close. It might be at a place that's a big turning point, because if it can get above, and there's like 3 intersections here at like 742, I think the next wave in line is the bigger wave. It's the one that goes all the way up to about $9. So that's a big move. I don't know if I would get in right now if I'm trading it, because technically it's not quite out yet. It's like it pushed up, which is great, but it needs to hold here and then like break back above. So this is a very simple trade because it's easy to see what needs to happen here. Yeah, it definitely pushed out, which is good, which means it's pushing like the extremities. And that's a creek jump right here. Didn't hold it though, so we just have a wick above. Now it's trying to hold right here. But what you would see is you'd see an advancement probably to like 756, and then it would hold above here at like 743, and then that would be right around the place it would go. It should just take off. I have to double check. I think it made a higher high. This might be a really lucrative trade if you want to trade it, if you wait for confirmation. I would not buy it right this second. Like I said, personally, I can't promise anything either. 744, they both only hit the top, so it didn't go over 744. But if it comes over 744 and it pushes to like 750s, you want to see kind of a backup. As soon as it hits 744 here, I think it's out and is ready to go. I think on the low time frames, it might look a little overcooked, overheated, but on the higher time frames, it's got plenty of space and it's just getting started, you know? So I would expect there to be sort of a push up, maybe a pullback at lowest, maybe 730. If it took till next week or whatever, or even a week away from that, it wouldn't surprise me. Meaning that if this like went up and then came back down slow and then went, that wouldn't be particularly surprising. But this would be the first jump, and this would be the second one. And I don't normally do this because I think it's a weird way to do it, but if you took that measurement and you bring it to the side here, it's essentially the exact same level, and you look at where that is, the expectation would be that you go to that 236, which is kind of right where it should be on this breakout. And so that wave would bring you back up to 935. So you're talking about a 28% trade there. Now, here's why that's really significant, because if you look at the bigger picture, that does make sense. Like this, if it did break down, even if it's going to go and continue to be low, and we don't know for a fact it will, but even if this did continue to be low, this is essentially like a massive hook on what could become either a cat ear, right, that then drops down again, right, or breaks back above. In this case, it's just a backup wedge and comes back above at some point, right, and then breaks out again. And the cross up and the cross down here are very simple. So this is a good chart, in my opinion, because it's pretty simple to read. And I think that it would be fairly obvious, you know, when and if it goes. So the first trade is not all the way up to 12. The first trade is just to 9. And then you're going to have the issue of like, well, you could have a cat ear here. We'll get to that lake when we get to it, right? But that to me is fairly straightforward. And if you look at the RSI, it also looks very similar. Like it looks like a build down here that's narrowing. And you'd expect it, if it continues to jump creeks, so if jump the first one right there, the second one would be right here. And then the last one, if it does jump, which is an if question. So this would be the second one right here. This would be the first one here. The last one would be from whatever high that is. Again, if it doesn't, I can't say it definitely will. But that last one would be 1, 2. Really, that could be the last one. But if there was another one, it would be like over here somewhere. You know what I mean? And I'm kind of making it really tight, but on Clove, yeah, we'll take a look at Clove. Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me if this somehow works itself into March 4th. And I wouldn't be surprised if on March 4th it's actually up high, getting ready to either distribute or whatever. So even though I've got this going kind of straight up here, I mean, it is what it is. The wave itself, probably the middle here, the cat where it jumps the creek in the middle of these 1, 2, 3, 4. And so that's right there. That's roughly where the middle is. And then it would be where it jumps this creek, which is the second middle. So the wave would finish around the 21st of February, potentially. This could go up that quickly. Yeah, so there's a number of ways that could happen, and then I think you would expect there to be probably a chop period until earnings. And then it's a decision from there. So this probably wouldn't happen until later anyways, if it did happen. Yeah, it makes sense to me. And like I've talked about this one before, it's a massive potential diamond. And as it stands, even though this looks kind of so-so right now because it's chopping back down, it's having trouble with some EMAs, there's potential it could go lower. Really, this cooled off very quickly. Like this was being overbought, and it's back down to below 50 now. And that's where it was here on November 1st. So there's definitely a potential that this could still be bullish. And when we look at the big picture, I think what's happening is probably best described as sort of a consolidation on like the outer. Really, it looks like it's consolidating right along the outer side. So that red marker that I've got it hitting, it's like it's re-breaking the diamond, which is another reason why that wave would be, again, potentially considerable. Yeah, if it can hold and jump over that little red line there that I've got, that would be the diamond break again. So I could certainly see why that would propel it upwards in this move. There's plenty of space. I think it's a really easy trade if it breaks out here. So I'm gonna put a marker on it. It's basically out, but I probably wouldn't trade it unless it comes above and makes a landing again on the top of that red line. So I'm gonna put a marker here at like 750, and if it pops, I think it's a potential that it's just going. And that's a good trade, really easy trade. The options chain is not particularly strong on that one, so just keep that in mind. It's okay, but it's not like the best. We've talked about Fang. Fang's kind of been like the bigger disappointment today. It's really struggling to hold anything. It's on the marker it should be. If it's going to reverse, it's ready to go. Maybe it has a larger divergence. NU finally lost its rising. Can't see what all this going on here, but it finally lost its rising kind of rally. I would have called it like a curve. I mean, it just held that curve really strong. I sort of doodled this early on, and it sort of just held it. So I don't know. It was pointing towards what I perceived as a top. There's an intersection right here around 1580 on earnings, but it recently backed away, and so I had another target here, which was a previous floor, and that makes sense. So the 1350 is a floor, and it's hitting that, and it's kind of trying to see if it can hold it. There's a much wider uptrend here that it hasn't touched in a while, and that might be where it needs to go before earnings. So I would not be surprised if it's still here on earnings. One thing we mentioned was that the daily and the 4-hour tend to only really break down in terms of weakness when they cross down on these upper RSI hits. So it's not that this is definitely bearish and it can't go higher. That's not really the case. Sometimes that backup still leads to a higher high. As you can see previously, like once it's crossed down, it backs up, it still goes higher, right? And then there's just divergence on the RSI when it's pushing up. Like this whole push up right here is really kind of like the two of these are the same thing. They both go up high after crossing down. They both come back up and push to a higher high, which distribution often does. This is a different kind of example back here because really once this hits the top, it backs up. This is way back in February of last year. Once it hits that top, it kind of just backs up and then just keeps doing it again and again and again. It's advancing the whole time. This is the daily time frame, mind you. This isn't like some short-term thing. So NU certainly has the ability to stay overbought for quite a while and just kind of rally back and forth at the top. More often than not, if it's getting to that point, though, you're starting to extend, right, your lead here. So you're giving yourself, a little bit of a go-ahead, but you're also, by backing up, you're giving yourself a little more room to go, but you're also kind of overextending. So just keep in mind, and maybe you could look at the weekly. This may still get to 1580, in a final kind of hoorah move. I would be concerned, I guess, of it being overextended at that point and just kind of watching it. If I were trading it with just shares only, I'd be out. Because I think I had mentioned several times, like, you probably trade this until it crosses down. And once it does, then you're out. You wouldn't be trading the top, but it's okay. Still a really good trade. If you started where we entered down here at like 11 to 1350, I mean, that's a great trade. So cheers to you if you just did shares and you got that. I don't really want to talk about MTW right now. It's doing something kind of odd. It's really forming a bit of a rising triangle, which is where you have multiple tops at the same point, but it's making higher lows. The issue with this is it's just doing it on weakness. At this point, there's like no volume behind it. So it's just lost all its volume pushing up. What does that mean? Well, what I would presume is that it's going to melt up or melt down, or both. Could have a massive pop and then a big drop, or vice versa. Because it's essentially like bleeding it out dry. There's no powder there, and it's kind of just a waiting for news moment. And I'm not particularly convinced that this needed to go. I mean, I had this red thing on the chart for a while. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this one, but not particularly thinking that it needed to go beyond this. This is essentially like that cross from the cat ears. If it does, then this becomes like a potential for a 50-50, which is a big deal because it could go all the way back above not all-time highs, but the recent 52-week highs. It could come all the way back above 650 fairly quickly. I think that's a very, very real possibility that it pushes that high if it can break 480. It's done this before where it's had these kind of really quick dips into like earnings, and then it kind of rockets shortly after, even on weakness. So I'd be interested to see what happens. And the RSI is cooling off. So I do have shares in this position still. I've got some really long like leaps that aren't doing anything because nobody wants to buy options on this. But certainly it's a possibility that this has like a big push up that's very sudden. It goes to near 650. I think it would have to be like an earnings beat or something pretty dramatic that confirms to bears and bulls that this is ready to keep going up, and that bulls are going to take over and bears need to get out. Otherwise, it's a lot like what we were talking about with AMC and other stuff where like I think it could still have an extension to the upside. Like it could still have a pop here that goes up to near, let's just say like 550 or something like that. And it's just kind of an extension move that then drops back below this white line. Now the white line coming down here is the macro widening, and it's huge. So make no mistake about it, like breaking out of that is not a small thing. It's a really big deal. But the last time we did that, we just kind of extended and then dropped back through it. And the way this is positioned, as it kind of appears to be a lot like, again, AMC, even though maybe it's not perfect, I certainly could see why this might wave down here. So just be really mindful that this could still have potential to make new all-time lows. It's not nearly a guarantee here at all. So I'm bullish on it long term. I'm not super bullish on it short term unless I see it push up and basically SOS at 650, which is a lot. Could it happen? Maybe. The setup is there, but I think it's going to depend on earnings. And MPW earnings is really bad, by the way. They have been like a week or two off for some reason. I don't know why. Maybe they did something different this time and they're actually going to stick to it. But almost every single time, it's like their finance department is like late or something. Like they don't have the data for them right away or something. I don't know. They're like, oh, we're not ready yet. Okay, well, because they keep saying like Wall Street or whatever, Forbes, whoever it is, they do the calculation based on statistics and what's statistically likely. It's always way off for MPW. It's been like a week off almost every time, which is a lot. You're just waiting around for like a week to see what's going to happen. You're like, well, okay. And I think one time it did it and the date just kept pushing back. And I was like, when is this ever going to actually happen? Feels kind of silly at that point. Anyways, Wolf, big move up this morning. The first thing I did was like look at this and consider, is it going to close above this? It's more of a minor creek. I wouldn't call it like a major creek right here. This is a resistance marker that I've been using for a little while. It's based on a couple things, but I think it's one of the main places of resistance. And right now it's kind of coupled with 575. You can see that after pushing up, it dropped back below it to 560 and it hasn't closed above it. It's like wicking right along it. And the volume again went from like strong to like anemic. So to me, I'm like, meh, this kind of just looks like the typical ice grab, like the hook, from back here. And I want to see what the 50-50 is. So I drove it back down to where I think that support was here in the middle on the cat ear. And the 50-50 is right at 479. So I would not at all be shocked if this drops to 479 and does not hold any of this kind of highly positive looking material today. I mean, it jumped 10% this morning. But I would not at all be surprised if it doesn't hold that and it sells back down. And it would probably do it in line with this creek now, since it's pushed out to the upside. Yeah, it's like a widening right there. Or a narrowing rather. So it looks like actually it looks like a wedge. But I think that's probably the wedge breakout. And then it's usually about 30%. That's kind of the poor man's way of doing it. So maybe at most $6. And then we'll do like 30. I think it's like 30. Well, maybe it's like 60%. I can't remember. That's a lot though. That would be like 630. I feel like it's like 30%. 382 is right there. See, that seems more accurate. That's like 32%. I don't know. I'm going to have to double check. There's some low, there's some probabilities that are like pretty decent for breakouts on like wedges and stuff. And I'm not feeling this one very much. It almost looks like a beak. Like this whole thing should be included almost, if that's the case. Well, if it was a beak, I would expect it to maybe go up again to like 620, which follows. I mean, that's the previous floor, so it's not. That's about right. That seems about right. So possibly could get up to about 620 here. If it can manage to push any further, then I might go there. Otherwise, I'm thinking it's going to come back down to fill that gap. And it would look like it would do it by around Tuesday. So again, sell off maybe tomorrow. We'll see. Today will be a bit of a litmus test for it, I suppose. Going through all the main ones, and I know we keep adding them, but we'll probably chop some of these off pretty soon. I mean, WTO is actually looking okay. It had that move up and over, so it exited. You can see right here, it exited that trend. It doesn't mean it's going to break out. It just means it's out for now. So I said if it did that, then you'd be waiting to see if it could break above 30 cents here. That's the key level. And then it could go all the way back up to near 35. So. Just like everything else, it could potentially still come back and retest this bottom. Basically make a double bottom or a weakness here. It's just not quite out yet. It jumped one creek. It's got more to go. I would just keep layering it and just seeing if it kind of keeps going up and over each time. That's what you want to see. Leave it at that. All right, let's look at Clove. That one was requested. I think there was another one requested as well. But right now, I'm going to go to Clove first, because that's the one that came to my head. Unity. They had like an inexplicable like sell-off or something, right? I don't remember. Something happened really bad. Clover Health Investments. Yeah, okay. I mean, I don't need to rechart this because I'm going to trust that my charting is right. So I presume that this would come back up, potentially come back over the top here, and then if it builds support, like this little green bar right here would indicate above 396, that potentially it could just go. So you're really looking at this like it could be like a very straightforward SOS right now. There's a narrowing. This is weird, this push down, but I don't know. There's maybe nothing else to that right now. Well, based on the way this is set up, there's no other... How would I do this? Maybe back here? Okay. So there's one other place, that one, because that's where it jumped above this other creek and made a bottom. So we had surmised that if it comes low, it could come pretty darn low, because there's a number of spots down bottom. One easy one being like this 350 if it just came back down to this floor. The other one being around 320. But Clove itself locally could have a dip to like 422 with basically nothing happening. So like the way it's set up right now, it wouldn't surprise me if this tests 422. At that point, I'd watch to see if it does some kind of a weakness here, like to see if it tries to dip below and not form a trend. I'd be really curious to see what happens at 422, because that might indicate there's a desire to kind of push it further down. especially if it goes kind of low. If it does that, if it makes a weakness here, I think it'll come back up and retest this guy. So it'll come back up to like 443, like it's going to go, but then it'll drop back down, and it'll actually go all the way down to this support at 391. So it's really no different than what I drew over here. And then you have a potential for a number of things to happen. Like you could break down further through 360, or you could just reverse and go back up. But at that point, it's pretty easy to see where that is. It's not like, again, I don't look at this stuff like it's some kind of magic. It's really simple. If you see a move like that, it drops through. That makes sense to me because this looks like an S curve. It's tempting to say it just breaks out and goes right this second. It definitely is tempting because it looks like it's trying to hold on right here and like just build out an M cross up, but it didn't really cross anything on that M. So if it is an M cross up, it hasn't even really finished yet. It would need to do like a kind of a double whammy right here and just go. Either way, you'd have an answer. It's not, again, not particularly hidden in this case. I think what's more likely is this alternative. I think it goes back to 390s. And then potentially it could just reverse and head back out, but it'd have to get all the way back up to 354. And what always kind of makes me stop and ponder things is the intersection after the fact. So like once this drops down, where's that intersection at? It's at the 27th of February. I mean, this is the kind of place where if you're looking at this as a cross trend, like sine waves, this is the kind of place where you'd expect there to be potential for a bottom. And so there could be a pretty massive reaction here that just doesn't quite get above, right? And we would, again, see that as a difference. Like this is obviously bullish if it goes up, and it's obviously not if it doesn't, above that 450 area. But I think if it breaks down, you'd probably see this not advance, probably only go to like 430, and then you probably, again, attempt to get down to a new low. And it's not looking particularly weak. I think if by that point, maybe the 20th through the maybe the 20th through like March 1st or whatever, this area right here, if by that point you're kind of down low and you're retesting this creek body, I think you're okay. I think it could easily make that bottom and then build back out. And this is where you, again, would kind of want to watch it walk back through and see where it goes. That's not the end of it, but this short term, that's what I would say. If it can't hold here and just go, this is kind of the alternatives. I know I just drew one, like that's kind of in the middle of everything of these other two, but that's really the same idea. All I'm saying is like it's backup levels, right? You have a backup level here at 390. You have a backup level here down to like 350. Simple, right? If it's going to go, it needs to chill out a bit, reset indicators, and then it can go. This could be an SOS, be very healthy, but still have like a backup and still be healthy. So like that's important to know. So SOS with a backup is very normal. If this comes back down at any point and holds support, it's probably really strong. But right this very second, I think it's kind of teasing out the two options. So because it's compressed here, they're purposely doing it. I mean, the operators know what they're doing. They're not dumb. They're teasing out the two options. To me, it looks more likely that this is going to try to drop. And again, I would watch 424. If for whatever reason breaks out before then, and it's just a breakout. If it holds 423 and does not hook here, it could be very good. You know, it could continue this direction and break out later. You know, there's just so many different paths that you can take within the same structure. But the key level is 425, and then above at like 460. That's pretty easy, right? Breaks down one, breaks out of the other. Let's see, U, and I think there was CRC or CRSR, Corsair Gaming. Short. The APS is pretty good. I mean, pretty positive. Let's take a look at like a larger time frame on Corsair. This is going to require a little bit of finesse. So just give me a second. I need to find the floor. I kind of think it's at the floor right now. At that 1180 something. Because it's right there. It was used here. Let's see if we can give it a more definite floor though. So it came down, tried to hold a support, lost it. 1, 2, 3. Here. On April of 2024. Let's go to the daily. So I guess when I'm doing something like this, it kind of looks like a no-brainer. Like, why don't you just use like 12 or something? Well, it may be that 12 is the number, you know, and I guess we're going to find out. But there is another marker down here at like 1150 that's a contender. And both of those would be potential floors. I mean, it just depends on how you interpret it. So there's one in the middle of the two that's sort of one. I'm wondering about it. It's like right here around 1180. I think 12 might be the one because I'm trying to make sure I get this right. When it finally broke down, it was right there. It's a loose floor. It's just 1193 is a weird number. Let me check 12. Yeah, this is where it wicked to before it took off. Okay, so 12 it is. So Corsair is currently on a bit of a tear right now because it broke out of a couple things. Well, at least one. and then it broke out what seems to be the major downtrend here, but I need an established floor to really understand what's happening. So that's why I was trying to like go back and look for a floor. It's not enough to just have a the trend. The trend is fine. It's there. It doesn't really matter how you position this either. I think that I think it's out either way. My guess is that it was being used to get back to 12. So if you look carefully, you can see that the yeah, you can see that when it broke that downtrend right here, and it may have even been a little bit lower. I'm kind of giving it a lot of space, but you probably could argue it's like here. When it broke that downtrend at 1050, it rockets up to like 12. And it's really just a matter of like triangulation that's where it goes. So you can see the S curve coming down here around 12. And then that drop on the second half. And that's, again, just very apparent. It's not really complicated. It's pretty straightforward. And so this was all like a sell-off. This is just a 50% retracement that goes back to 12. It's outside of the trend, which is a big deal, but it's currently on the daily like really overbought. And it's probably going to be in large part determined by what we see on the weekly now. And it's also really overbought. Put it this way, it hasn't been this overbought since the stock was basically created back here in 2021. It was the last time it was that overbought. So kind of seeing mixed. I'd have to look. This might be one that would be good to look for fundamental information about. Maybe $12 is a good price for it. And if that's the case, then you know, this could end up being like a range build out, for example, that builds a longer term range around 12. And I don't think that everything is always got to be like super negative or something just because it's breaking out and it looks overbought. So like you can see that's this drop from, I'm kind of trying to stretch it out a bit. This drop from like 21 to where this bottom is, not really paying attention much to those wicks. Appears to be like 626, and the middle is right around that weird number, probably 1180s, but like you could put it at 1150 or 12. It's hard to say that this could just keep going. With everything that we're seeing, it looks extremely overextended. But you know, if it passed above 12, I don't see why it couldn't potentially go significantly farther. So I think this is more likely right here going to be the stopping point, which is already there. So you're asking about a short position, and I kind of agree that this is a possible short play at this point. Because to me it looks like it's already sort of done its thing. Only back to 750s. That's way down here. There's like a support level back here, I guess. Well, you can put it this way. If it's gonna come back down through 1040, then usually my expectation is it's going to kind of use that as like a, maybe to retest it, you know what I mean? Has it dropped on earnings before? Yeah, a couple times. Almost all of these are run-ups, though, like on or after earnings. I mean, it could take a while. There's no really perfect answer to this. I wish there was. The uptrend is very low. It's really, really low. So that's as good of a guess as I could make. The intersection here of these two creeks, again, this kind of seems like it already hit the target that was in mind. I'm sorry, I gotta get this right. It's taking a second. All right, yeah, so it's the lower hit, not the higher hit. This is this one. All right, so basically around next earnings, there's kind of a potential that we're down here. I mean, this volume is crazy, so like locally anyways, it's pretty big volume. I would not be surprised if it's just kind of walks down all the way back to next earnings. And I do agree with 730. I don't know what you said, but if it got there beforehand, I think it can come as low as $7. Because if this move is really over, that 786 is 722. It's kind of right where it should be. Yeah. It looks to me like there's a really important pocket here. That could be an upper pivot. Doesn't have to necessarily hit there, but it looks like it would position itself right before the April earnings down low. Mm-hmm. Well, that's okay. You got out when you felt like you were ready to get out. I mean, you can't. I mean, it's always frustrating. I'm the same. I'm the same way. I get frustrated when I see a chart kind of blow past my expectations, and I'm like, bah, could have held on to that, and I didn't. But that's sort of the nature of the market sometimes. Sometimes if I'm out of a trade and I'm out of it pretty confidently, like I just don't look back. Like AMC was kind of like that yesterday. Even if this somehow recovers and comes back up, like I'm not ready to retrade again. And at the end of the day, like don't really want to trade the end of the week unless I'm like pretty sure it's going to pop the next week. So that just gives me a totally off day today where I'm like, I don't even really want to look at it. I mean, if it had ran, I would have just been out of luck. It could have run. I was like, yeah, maybe. It could go to 370 or 360s. I told the Discord I thought it was going to bonk at 350, and it did. But, like, that's why I got out. But it could have popped up and went higher, and I would have just missed out. I knew it was a possibility. So after, like, I traded out of it, I really didn't look at it pretty much the rest of the day. It was more just like peace of mind about, hey, I made the trade, it's done. There's no point in getting like worked up about it. Obviously, if it's a multi-day thing and you're just watching it tear, and that's kind of what happened with Apple, because I got out really early on Apple, ended up doing really well and beat its earnings and all this other stuff. But I was like, man, I would have made a fortune on Apple if I had just stayed in it. But I didn't, So, and so it's funny how like we beat ourselves up for like not knowing, but it's like, well, nobody knows. You do your best you can with the information that you have. Somebody hands you a pile of data, you just got to take it and run with it. This is looking kind of like it wants to try to pop a little bit. GME. So things can happen in the market that are unpredictable, right? And that don't really make a lot of sense. And what we're trying to do is do the best we can to give ourselves the most advantage and increase the chances that you're going to make money. And the way I think about that is based on just statistics. Like if I'm gaining knowledge, I'm becoming more and more likely to make money. If I'm making money, then I shouldn't complain about it, even if I miss like the bigger things. And just try to figure out like what did I miss that would have kept me in that trade longer? What could I have seen? Sometimes the answer is nothing, Like I might look at a trade and be like, yeah, I don't know. There's really nothing here that would have encouraged me to stay. It just kept going. And I bet you that there's some tools out there, like I know a lot of people use it's like a special level 2 data where you get a little bit more of the kind of behind the scenes stuff. That guy Glenn who used to come around a lot and he just kind of never came back. I think after the last time, I don't know. He came back to gloat about how we didn't run, but then we didn't run when he said we were going to run, and he wasn't like completely wrong. He was more right than I was, to be fair, I guess. But he said that he uses a something from like Goldman that tells you like buy-in data for, I don't really know how it's different than going to like Fintel and looking at who's buying it, but somehow it's different. So he sees something, which is part of what irritates me about it, because, and I talked to him about it a couple times when he came on, because I was like, well, look, man, not everybody has access to everything in the market. You can buy any kind of service you want to buy. And I guess there's a level of like ethics to it where you really shouldn't be buying a service and then just like sharing that data with everybody, because it's supposed to be a paid service. But on the flip side, you don't want to come in and be like, hey, I've got special information that you don't have, and I just know better. And it's like, well, okay. I mean, that doesn't really help anybody, though. Then it just feels like haughty. Includes the dark pool, level 2s. Yeah. So those are things that, like, you don't... I may not have access to, and so you may have access to something that I don't have access to. And I think that is a disadvantage for a lot of retail, is that in order for us to kind of get ahead, it feels like you're having to like buy these services, but really what these services are doing is just providing you with usually like summations of data or ways of interpreting the data that sometimes you can do by yourself, sometimes you can't. I think about unusual whales and how, remember in Apple, we were looking at Apple or whatever, and it was like 240s or something. I don't remember what the number was, but there was like a huge amount of open interest at these really high strikes. And I was like, it's kind of interesting because it doesn't look like it would go that far. It went that far, right? So it ended up going really far, but it's like that particular interpretation of like, let's look at the options chain. Oh, there's like 40,000 open interest at this really high strike on this really particular time frame. It's pretty interesting. And then, but in order to kind of see the buys and all that junk, it's easier to just pay the service and see the data. I don't know, man. In some ways that's good. In some ways that's bad. I guess freedom of information is a positive to some degree. Like, I don't like things being behind a paywall, but I can also respect the idea of free enterprise and like how really nothing in the world is free. I mean, we don't give away food for free. We don't do this for free or that for free. So people that are going to go out and summarize the data and provide you with a service or a tool to see that data, I don't think it's disrespectful for them to ask, or unethical for them to ask for payment, like any tool, right? And we're living in a world that it feels like, we should just get that for free, but maybe we shouldn't, you know. I don't know. Some of that data I feel like is special privileged data that should really be for everybody. Like, there's no reason why we should have to pay for certain things, you know, to see certain things. But at the same time, I mean, there is a lot of stuff available. I think if you did your due diligence and worked hard, you could probably achieve the same things that Unusual Whales achieves, for example, without actually paying for that service. So, goodness gracious, crashing, burning. So, I don't know, guys. Just kind of talking about stuff. I gotta do some other work today. I'm probably not gonna stay on too much longer. AMC kind of finally coming down off its little run here, and I think it's okay. I think it's a good thing. I'm not 100% sure. Oh, geez. Am I seriously gonna tow this thing? Man, sometimes the police are real D-bags. Are you serious? They didn't even like knock on their door. I'm so pissed off for them. I wish I could tell them, but they're not here. They're not home right now. I don't have their number. My neighbor got warned about their stuff on the street. I don't know why. They park on the street regularly. I think it might be because it's not been moved for a long time. So vehicles that just sit there for more than 30 days or something. But this guy's a douche. Excuse my language. Because I'm pretty sure he didn't even like go up to their door. I watched him come out yesterday and he put the sticker on their boat in their car. Which has been parked on the street. But this is like a dead-end road. Nobody comes down here. They're going to be furious. And you know when it gets towed and impounded, and it costs like a fortune to get it back out. Dang it. So he gave him a 1-day warning. The police. He wrote up a report, put a sticker on their car, and 1 day later, he's out here with a tow truck, taking pictures. I didn't call the cops. I have no desire to call the cops. 99% of the time. I don't want police involved unless it's like life or death. You guys are like, well, hey, you're anti-law enforcement? Bleeding heart. I'm not anti-law enforcement. I think it's important that we have law enforcement. But what this is not law enforcement. This is some kind of BS. He could have done the bare minimum and like maybe he did call them, but they could have knocked on their door and talked to them. Instead, they just slapped some stickers up, hope that they noticed 1 day later. I'm so mad for them. But there's nothing I can do. How many notices does the guy get before this? None. 0. I mean, it's possible that they got notices in the mail. I guess I don't know. I mean, I can understand if the vehicle's not working, and it may be that the vehicle's not working. I can understand if the vehicle's not working, they just can't move it. He's a mechanic, so he may have had it just on the back burner. But the boat? Towing his boat away is a big deal. He's got like a 22-foot, like kind of pontoon boat. There's nowhere for him to put it, though. He doesn't have driveway space. He's not allowed to park it in the lot next to him. So basically what they're saying is you can't own a boat in this city and like park it on the street. Again, the thing is like I would be upset if it was like a busy road, you know? But this seems like common courtesy to just try to work it out with people, not just give them a notice, slap a sticker on, and the next day come tow it away. Just come talk to them. Say, hey, man, we got to figure this out because we're going to have to get this towed off. I mean, I don't know the details of the situation. My neighbor's not a jerk or anything. If he talked to him, he probably would have moved it. So I feel like I'm bad about it. Like I should have gone and talked to him yesterday. I honestly thought that they would work it out. I don't know. The stickers are like these big orange stickers. Now I feel like a jerk. I should have gone and said something. I guess I don't know the full situation. I shouldn't judge. Maybe they did get the notice and they were like, "Forget that." But I didn't talk. I would never do that. I don't care that much about stuff like that. You parking on a street that there's not a no parking sign. I don't think that's the problem. I don't think it's about parking. Parking's temporary. You know, you get in and get out of your car at different times. I think it's the fact that it was sitting there for a long time. Like a long time. Like over 6 months, that they decided that they were going to notice them and move it. Because people park on here all the time. They got 2 tow trucks out here. Jeez. How are they going to tow the boat on a tow truck? It's like a hitch. It doesn't have a... That's really weird, man. Sorry. I know you guys are like, you can't see any of this. Oh, ADTX. I'm still in ADTX, but I'm not so sure about the dip. You know, I just don't know. I was talking about it earlier. You probably were out. I know you're in and out all day, but... Yeah, the problem with the ADTX dip is it was 10 to dollar MGOL. Nice. That's a huge return. Oh, they're gonna like put it on there backwards or something. Gosh. I don't know what happened. All right, so there's a huge amount of volume in this drop today, and I was mentioning that first thing in the morning when we first came on, that I just thought it was kind of odd. There was a large amount of volume. It looked to me like this could just be a 50% retracement, so you got to be careful because this needs to come back above like 9 cents and hold to really be convincing of anything. And I'm just skeptical of this move because it was a breakout of a wedge that broke up and then reversed. It's possible it's like a double diamond reversal. Sometimes they do that. And then it was widening right here and then broke out and then came back down, and it could go right back up. But at this point, now there's a new resistance, right, that it's got to deal with again, which is the first one. So it's almost like it broke out. There was too many sellers, and then somebody just like tanked it, and it went really far. And they used extended hours, obviously, to do that. So if it can buy back up and get back above here, then I think that target's met. And I had thought maybe it happened later, like over yonder, like around 6 cents after going up. So, I mean, technically that happened, but it was like super fast. So what I don't like is I don't like that it went back through the structure, like the previous structure. I like that it came back above 7. This morning it was really struggling at 0.073. It needs to come over 0.078, and then ultimately the 50% retracement is not enough. If it stops at 8.8 over here, which is like 8 cents, then I think there's still potential that it just gets kind of hung up. So I'm just not a huge fan of this. I'm not out of the play. I'm just kind of sitting on it. But to me, it just looks so-so. I don't know. I think I was talking about it earlier. It's still divergent technically, even though it pushed lower here. The RSI has been holding up pretty well. I think up in the 4 hour, it was still the one that I was looking at this morning. It was still technically kind of divergent on the bottoms, but you can see what I'm concerned about. Whoa, what just happened? Why did it do that? Oh my gosh. I jacked up my chart, y'all. There. That was weird. Yeah, so what I'm concerned about is, you see how like the RSI came back down, and on the 4 hour, it's actually fine. It still made it higher low thus far. So even though it like came lower on this high volume dump, it ultimately like is still up high on this. But the issue that I'm finding, or I guess that I'm saying that I have right here, is that there's some inconsistency with this, and that it came back below. Just like this guy dumped below that triangle, this came back into that formation and below the moving average there on the 4 hour. So it looks kind of ugly, and it wouldn't be impossible to see this come back and try to dump low again. You see this setup? Because of that move, this could be like a flush. Really, and the intention is the RSI flush. So, yeah, TradingView wigged out. I don't know what happened. I didn't do anything. I didn't even hit a keystroke or anything. I don't know how that happened. Maybe you could do something with like a middle mouse button. I don't know. It just randomly put my RSI up into my, like overlapped it. So you understand my hesitation here, Jason? You had mentioned the target is likely no matter how it gets there. That's true. Meaning like if this hits here on the 26 versus being like a pivot low. Yeah, I don't remember all the details of what I said. So, yeah, one is out here March, one's up here. The target's likely, but there's good reason for it. But I can't speak to, when we look at stuff like this, I think I've said this before, I really can't speak to fundamental, how is this going to work? They can't possibly bring that up. It's going to be like scratching the road. They're grabbing it in reverse and pulling it up on the wheel side of the boat, but the other side is just a hitch. How's that going to work? You have to put something there. I don't know. It's strange. What's that mean? Sorry, I'm talking about these tow trucks trying to take my neighbor's boat. I can't speak to the fundamentals of a company that I'm not really familiar with. So I don't know what's happening underlying that caused it to get this low. This EPS is like off the charts low, 160s. I mean, so does it warrant that consideration? Yeah, it does. And you have to keep in mind, like, this could be another example of a, I think based on what we're seeing here with the jump, that it looks likely that this would eventually kind of make its way back out and up. And it's already made the first major creek jump here. And it seems very likely it's going to come back up and retest this green line in any case, which is at 18 cents. But it could be an example kind of like WTO, which if it continues to kind of make advances, but they're slow as all get out, you could end up with something like this, you know. And I'm not wanting to make it sound like it's a guarantee when it may not be. And we may not see it until way later here. So, I mean, there's all kinds of weird things that in the market like could delay an action. And ultimately, yeah, you're right. It did come up there, but it took forever, and who knows? You know, I don't like the idea that it's inevitable. So don't ever hear me say that. I just said it seems likely that it's going to hit that target. And I like the play. I'm in it. I'm trading it. So that tells you what I feel about it. But that doesn't mean it's going to work out. I mean, I traded WTO as well. And WTO has just yet to kind of build its footing. It's just taking forever. And this is the best it's done in a long time to jump over here and try to hold this. The potential here is really great that it has a pretty massive wave 3 potentially if it can kind of get out of this zone around 35 cents. But it's taken a long time to get there. So man, my neighbor's going to be pissed off if he didn't realize what was going on. Sorry. It's happening right outside the window, and I'm like, I feel like I'm not involved at all, but I'm like watching it happen right next to the screen. The screen is like just shifting my eyes, and I can see out the window, and I'm like, oh, this is really distracting. Yeah. I mean, look, if it happens, I'm going to be happy with it. I'm just not sure I can say with like perfect confidence that that's going to be where it is either. We've had some problems with these type of intersections. Were you here for that earlier when I was talking about that? I don't want to like make that comments again, but since you're here, earlier I was talking about how this idea of pivots can be kind of misleading, and it's been a very hit or miss way of doing this. Okay. I think it was the other Jason that was here. So you don't have to rewatch unless you got to run. But it's very simple. So the market has this tendency to kind of direct this market has a tendency to kind of direct price action against the trend. So when you're going up, you'll start seeing indications on the bottoms where you might be going. And usually it's the cross-up pattern. So if you were like ascending, I'll do it here on the left. I don't know if that'll be enough to see it. But if you're, for example, if you're ascending upward, then you'd look at a top, and then you look at where the breakout is on the bottom, right? And this would give you a sense on that cross trend of like, oh, where is that potentially pointing? That's one way to do it. Another way would be to look at, for example, like double bottoms. If there's a weakness, a sign of weakness, for example, that's also a really good way of understanding potential direction changes later. The same is true when we look at, so there's two kinds, right? There's cross and then there's tops. So then just like here, there's cross and then there's bottoms. So I talk about signs of weakness, and we talk about that a lot. We talked about that on AMC. We were talking about that today on AMC because of what happened this morning. That dip down low gives the impression that it's trying to push lower, and then it's taking it up the opposite way. And you see the same thing happen in a lot of stocks in the market. I don't often talk about the dip higher or the push higher unless we're talking about these things. And this is where that applies, because likewise, when you're going down, you often get these, like, we call them like ice levels or cat ears. Sometimes if it's a larger formation, it's more obvious. And that directs this way. Like there's some kind of an inherent trend there. Usually it's a nice clean 50-50. There's some intersection here. Sometimes it's not like that. Sometimes you get kind of a build out and it looks like a bit of an SOS or a UT, right? An upthrust. Just like this could look like a spring. This could look like an upthrust. And it would seem to us that that is apparently like, you know, kind of weak. But really, like, that's another way of understanding those trends as well. And so the problem that I often find is that these two guys, they often don't point to the same spot. And so what I've had trouble identifying is whether or not there's a real rhyme or reason to it. It's a pattern that's there, and I know it's there, and I've seen it play out. And retrospectively, I can look back and say this happened a number of times, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times. But it's so much easier when you already have the target in mind. When you're predicting future targets, you have to be really good about where are you actually placing those markers. So some of the things that I've learned in the last 3 years is that there's two potential markers here, for example. Really, there's three, but we'll talk about just the two. So one thing is, like, I look back at something like this, I can look very easily and see that this is a top, right? And then this is a bottom. And that's the easiest one to find. So it's super simple. Where was the last known low, and where was the high before it changed direction? But there's other projections here as well, because technically this was in and of itself like a sign of weakness, to be clear, because it had hit a bottom already and it was consolidating, and then it pushed down lower and reversed. And it's possible that you could consider that a sign of weakness, especially if before it happened it hit like a really important level. And so when I look back at this, I can tell that the level that this came up to, this is how my brain is like mapping these out. So if you're wondering like, why did you pick that line? It's because I'm thinking about where those really are. And this could be perceived as kind of an SOW of sorts. And even though that's still significant, I don't think it's on accident that that's there. It does give kind of a skewed perspective of what might be happening, because this ultimately was the support back here that this guy goes back to test in the future on that upward push. And so if I look back at that now, it kind of gives you a different feeling. Like, what if I use this and the next guy? Well, that looks more accurate to what we actually experienced, doesn't it? It's like, yeah, then it's like, oh, these are not, this is kind of like a secondary motion. This is really that final push down when it actually hits the EMA. And then this is the real support. So this give you like different ways of interpreting the same information. but using like different points of interest. Gaps are really important. A lot of times it's not really clear, and you can see like the drop down levels are really important. That's like this guy. Where does it kind of fall off a ledge? Because usually that means it just lost a support. So it's a really simple way of finding it, because you're like, I don't know where it is. Well, where did it lose the support? Lost the support right here. So if it bounces, it's likely going to come back up and check that area. It's super straightforward, right? That's not really traditionally what you'd think of. Maybe some people would be like, well, it did come up here, Booksy. Yeah, but I would usually consider that ledge drop to be very significant. Like it's going to be a point of intense interest later if it rebounds. Something was lost there. And sometimes, like that's an ascending pattern, like it is over here, for example. But then you start looking at these things, you're like, really, they're all the same. Like they all kind of drop and then they rebound to these intersections. Why can't you trade that? You can trade it. It's like auto reaction trading. That's exactly what I do sometimes on here. Is like it should be auto reacting back up. And that's the wave analysis part of it. So when I look at this bigger picture, the question is, did we have the same kind of auto reaction trade to some of these earlier levels? No, we haven't had one to 35. So as it builds out, you start looking at those signs and you say, are we pointing towards that auto reaction? Yes. Do you see how this is like coming together all of a sudden? So like it goes from, okay, we know that this does work. On a smaller scale, it tends to happen more often. On a bigger scale, how else would you know that that's happening unless what? These kinds of things are at play, like are bears and bulls pointing back towards that? I think that's just sort of inherent in the market. You know, if you're below a resistance level and you're trying to get there at a certain time, or you're trying to get there by a certain date, you're going to kind of try to build a trend that gets you there. And I just think that's straightforward. I don't think there's a lot of fancy shenanigans involved in like, oh, we want to build a trend to get us back here before earnings or something. I think it's going to go back up to 31 by earnings. I'm a bull. Well, anytime I see a bull trend, then I'm going to try to trend towards that by earnings, right? The problem is, while that's very consistent, and it does tend to lead to really simple, easy to find targets, in this case, it's confirming that this is a high likelihood because bulls want to go there. They're trying to get there by earnings. While that is true, what I've unfortunately found is that I can't really tell the difference between that and what's considered like a pivot on a wave. And so that's a bit of a different question. And I think there's a greater explanation to it. And I did it once upon a time, and I haven't done it since, where we talked about what those might be. But I guess the best way to describe it is like a pivot on a wave would be like a circular motion, right? A radial motion. Think of like a sun or something. And so that's another question in my head. I'm like, well, is it possible here that this is like part of a radial motion and this is really like a halfway point on a wave? And then I have to look at the information that's been given to me, and I'm like, yeah, it could be. If that's the case, does it mean that we ever actually get there? Well, yeah, maybe we might get there. We could also see that this at some point stops short of it. You know, it may not get there. It may only get to 18 cents way out here in April. I mean, if it followed this out without hesitation and it was essentially like perfect, and I tried to make it as close as I could to being in the middle, but we can kind of like fudge it a little more. There we go. This would imply that you might get hung up because this is the downtrend. What's the timeline for $7 for AME? You mean AMC? I don't think it's going to hit $7 till like way later in the year. So I don't know where that's coming from. Kind of out of left field there. I think we're going to get up to 4, maybe at most 430, and then probably track back down. If we break out and we go to like 5, then you have to see an SOS up there to get to like something like 7. Otherwise, we're probably going to go down into May and then break out at that point. And that's when you'll see 7, May to June. Right, so like you can see how like this build out may lead you right back up. And I think that those pivots, like we're talking about, why not? I mean, we see those big auto reactions here. Why can't you see one of them right here? Well, you could. But this is the question that I don't have an answer to, because I do think, yes, we just saw it. I literally just gave an example of how that happens, and it happens. So if it can happen on a small scale or a medium scale, it can definitely happen on a large scale, and it did. And it happened on a stock called AMC, where it happened on a macro scale that this is what the setup was, and it had built out a bottom, and then on that day where that intersection was, that's where it went up to. Without a shadow of doubt in my mind, this happened, and it was like a gigantic correction almost. But I've also found, for whatever reason, that sometimes that is like the middle of a much larger structure, and it's present, but there's some other target in mind. Like this, for example, would be a good way of understanding it. It's like there's these parallels here, right? And these two are parallel with each other. Well, while they're building up this strength and like trying to see if we're going to hold, if there's a lot of weakness there, it might be wise to consider the parallels as more important, because really, like at the end of the day, it is what it is. If it's weak, it's weak, you know? And if it continues in weakness, I don't think it's worth waiting for some move to happen that may not warrant it. And sometimes this is kind of what happened on WTO, is that the stock remained very weak and failed to ever make those big giant reactions. And what it did is it kind of laid up like on top of its next layer here, and it's just kind of sitting there. And it makes me think that, well, this is totally a possibility for really any stock in the market to kind of take its time to get to some end. If you want to trade the zone, you're going to build a range. So there's really no reason to expect that it has to do that. And so sometimes I'm not really sure why we get these massive auto reactions where we do. I know that there's a triangulation there, and I know it's important. Then that level will be retested. More than likely, there's a goal there that at least tells you that there's some desire to go there. Maybe it won't be retested, but there's some desire to go there, and it's decently strong enough to make trends in the market. Okay, but I don't know how to perfect this to where I could definitely say, yeah, it's going to happen. Except to say, like in this case, when it breaks above 13, well, that's way off in the future. So the only other thing I can do is kind of look at maybe the iterations and look at the way this is laying up one layer to the next. Is it breaking out? Is it trying to find footing? Is it making new bottoms constantly, like new lows, which is what's happening here, versus making higher lows? Where do you see that turn up happening? If the turn up's happening, like with AMD, this is the one I was talking about earlier. It's kind of like, I still am not really sure which it is. It could be that this does indeed rocket to like 130s next Wednesday. I mean, it's kind of boiling up, like constant pressure, but it has to prove that it's going to do that. And all we have right now is a higher low that left a gap, and that doesn't make me feel very good. So it would have been better if this had come back down and sort of made more of a final action here and then built out. I would have been like, yeah, this is a lot stronger. If this had come down low instead of breaking out, and then it came up and made a new high, I would have been like, yeah, let's go. I don't think there would be a question in my mind right now that this is going to go up if this was what it looked like. But instead, it continued high on what looks to me to be a bit weakness. There's lesser and lesser volume. And that's more of a sign of like a distributive action, you know, to like continue to push up when the volume's coming down and your RSI is getting overbought. I mean, everything about it just looks like, I I would have much rather preferred that this had not gone up Tuesday and Wednesday, but had just kind of chilled out and went back down, and actually could have hit a new low even. I wouldn't have cared. And then built out a higher high. I would be like, yeah, it's going to rock it, Instead, it's doing this weird like beak thing. And that just doesn't, to me, it doesn't look like strength. But, one, different folks, different strokes, I guess, right? One person looks at this and they're going to be like, nah, man, that's strong. It's like, it's pushing up, it's pushing resistance. It just needs to find the breakout and then the volume will come in. And that's kind of what happened with NU, where it just kept going. I don't know. Like, I looked at the same exact thing on NU and I said, that doesn't look good. It looks like garbage to me. Like when we were down low, and I said, but it looks like it's got enough in it to get it back up to 170, I think it was the number, and then maybe 1250. And then the highest it possibly go is like 1380, right? And now I'm like, well, technically it could go to like 15. But like every time I hit those levels, I'm like, I don't think it's going to go. In my head, I'm thinking it still looks like it's a little bit overdone. On most time frames, it was. So it was like, I don't know. I don't know what I don't know. Sometimes the volume's just there. Like, the stock is really popular. It's strong. It's got people behind it. It's got a good prospectus. And so it just does things that other stocks won't do. Like, it creates a motion upward and it backs up, finds support, and does it again. This never came back to these gaps. And there are gaps all over NU still. Like, I marked them off, but there's gaps all over the place on this thing right now. There's a gap at like 1095. There's another one down at 1063. I mean, I still think it's possible this could come down again to 9s. So I'm like, well, maybe that's what happens. But it never came back. So, I mean, it's possible this just goes up and just keeps going and doesn't come back. I guess what I'm trying to say at the end of the day is this is a great tool. It's a good resource for understanding potential tops and or bottoms. Like, this is clearly like a very important area. It's already earnings, so that makes it important anyways. But then this is just another way of understanding potential for wave structure. So what I'm doing right here is I'm basically just checking it against itself. Is it currently making higher lows? No, right? In fact, this needs to have that kind of strong reaction and make a higher high. Otherwise, I'm not really sure how to sell it because I don't think it's a good trade unless it presents itself like that. And there's some issues with RSI right here that make me wonder. It's a penny stock. It might have issues that other stocks don't have with indicators. So that's something I'm thinking about in the back of my head. But I'm like, yeah, I mean, it's pretty straightforward. It needs to come up and then push again, and then it can go. And there's a number of ways it could happen here that this doesn't actually do that until earnings. And we had talked about maybe it comes out sideways for a bit. I think that's still at play. And when you look at this larger wave and it starts looking really right to you, well, it doesn't mean that it's going to stay flat on this wave and create a giant bowl. Usually there's going to be a bit of a reaction. And another thing I've noticed is that oftentimes that even that pivot point, which is the center, still has a move there. It's like a push up and then back down. It kind of just defines the middle of a structure. And oftentimes that is where the bigger middle is. So I was talking about on AMD, it's possible that that's actually going to push out and break away because it hasn't gone. This looks like, by the way, that typical like potential spring type deal. I'm not sure. Big picture versus small picture in AMD is pretty different, but it does to me look like the kind of stock that would push up to like 120 and then back up to the middle here because it hasn't really traded that middle very much at all. You can see like it's been essentially distributing above the middle. So it may be necessary on this particular trend to push up and then come back down and land on that middle. So I'm looking at where that gap is and where that middle is, and I'm like, yeah, I mean, it's pretty well triangulated to have that run up here that looks like it's going to go all the way up, but then it drops back down and then goes up. And it's really like a bigger wave. And I think that's fair. I think that's a way of being a little bit more straightforward about it on my part, is that, hey, I think it's very possible this goes up to 120 by February 19th. I think it's a real possibility. But if it doesn't make a lower low before then I also think, and it doesn't kind of come back and mess with this gap, for example, before then, I think there's a very real chance that it's going to stop there and come back down over time. And by the end of the month, it could still be down here. And this just presents itself as a more of a bigger picture bottom that's built out in a range. We've seen it all in the market. We've seen it rip up and pass through here and just go. Like we were talking about with NU, just kind of kept going. Just walked up to the side of its trend and just kind of pushed out over a few days and just kept going. And then we've seen plenty of stocks do this where they have a bigger retracement. It becomes like a wave 1 of 3 kind of thing. And I think that's possible here. So I'm not going to be able to be perfect in the market. And that's why I'm trying to, like, my best to understand the different possibilities of like what that could mean, right? And that's why yesterday when you asked me, I said, well, I think it's trying to target that, so at some point it probably goes up there. But I think it could go back up to 10 and then fail to make a higher high and then come back down. Sure. It's kind of like this right here, I guess. And then it could potentially still make a lower low. Until it proves it's ready to change direction, there's not much you can do. And the only thing you can really do is kind of look at, all right, well, where did we go now? We pushed this creek, so we've kind of moved above, but when we came back through, I'm kind of ignoring these wicks. We really dropped off from 10 cents. So sure, it could rally back up to near 10 or 11 or something. It could have a pretty decent reaction here. We could come all the way up to 12, and then higher high or not higher high, doesn't really matter, like locally. It could still then come back down into earnings here. And this may end up becoming like a pivot, so on and so forth. And that's what this is. This is just kind of like an extension on that same move, the same idea, but it pumps up into earnings a little bit farther, hits 13 and then comes back down. Really, it makes very little difference. But right now I can see very clearly the need for 8, where that gap is, to just push past it and make the advancement back up near 11s. That's my guess, because I think it will react and probably try to go up again. But then I'm not sure. I feel like it's kind of anybody's guess. We could make a sign of weakness and then pump into earnings and then drop again. We could kind of stay afloat. We could dump. The liquidity shelves here are weird. The only thing I can say with certainty is this area right here, and that's why I've got it marked off, because this is where those cat ears are. Weird as they look in this particular stock, that's where they are. This is the resistance level right there. So that is the place to kind of beat. That's where you get pinned beneath if you're going to form out a range. I think that by itself, though, people complain about not being, I've heard, not you guys, but like, there have definitely been people that have come in and complained about, well, you think it can go up or down. Big help that is. Yeah, that's not really a big help just to say that. Oh, I could go up and go down. I'm definitely going to go sideways. Ha, ha, ha. But I mean, like, that's not anything new. And there was another guy that came in here and said, like, as an argument for like why you shouldn't do TA or something. It's like, well, there's another guy that came in and said, well, you basically are just on the principle TA is all just based on what goes up must come down. And I'm like, yeah, but why is that a bad thing to study? Because every time the stock moves up, eventually it does move down. And if you look at the things in terms of layers, that is true. The market moves in cycles, it moves in waves, sine waves. So why would you not expect sine wave methodology to be somewhat effective? And really what I see is like everybody's doing the same thing in terms of their interpretation. Wyckoff is probably one of the most different because it seeks to understand liquidity more so, like what's going on with liquidity grabs. It's a little more like behavior analysis almost. But I mean, what else is there? And the fact that you have this as a potential guide for at least somewhat for information gives you a really simple way of understanding where your range might end up being. You know, if this thing ends up forming out a range here on awaiting some news, okay. I don't see how this is a bad thing, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Like, I don't understand the negativity behind, hey, at least we have this. I mean, the only other way to look at the market is without anything. I don't know. I get this weird, like, I'm like, okay, well, here you go. Don't use any indicators. That's TA. Don't use EMAs. Don't use RSI. Technically, you shouldn't be able to use volume because volume to price analysis is technical. So this to me is like, how can you do anything else? You know, I don't see what else you could do here. Draw a trend, you know? I don't know. Like, that's the first thing I want to do is like, where's the direction going? It just seems odd. So I think even just having like this as some guidance is just really helpful. That's the way I see it. It doesn't have to be perfect. It's just there to help and understand like potential. And in the market, I can't find a much better way to determine timing. Timing is one of the things that's the most difficult. And at least with wave analysis, you get some timing. You don't really get any timing in Wyckoff at all. There's like no timing unless you consider P&F, which was added later. But just P&F, all that is about, it erases time. It just compresses time into X's and O's so that you can see the cause and effect. So it still doesn't give you a sense of timing. It just gives you an idea that like, if I have a target in mind, I need to build a cause for that target. Maybe that's a way to estimate timing, but technically it's supposed to not estimate timing. I know it's confusing the way I said that, but it is confusing. It doesn't really deal with timing. Yeah. So no, I didn't look at the news and catalyst for this, so maybe that's what's building out. ADTX. I gotta look at U, and then I think I'm gonna have to call it. Yeah, it's saying on Fintel that the average 1 year price target is $62, which doesn't make sense to me. ADTX currently operates and detects 2 programs focused on immune health and precision health. The company plans to introduce 2 additional programs dedicated to public health and women's health. For these, ADTX has entered into arrangements agreements with Mpw Therapeutics. That was on December of 2024, that article. I'm not really seeing much else in the way of news, so. The merger thing. But I don't know about these analyst forecasts that are saying like $60. It just doesn't seem right. That seems messed up. An IPO, intellectual property. Yeah, I mean, yeah, you could get money from royalties or whatever. Most people, I mean, it's not quite that simple, but it's like a brand or something like that. Oh, all right. Yeah, I don't know. I was asked about you. I don't know if that person's still here, but I'm gonna check it out. Unity, I think it had like a dump or something weird happened. Yeah, here. Unity's had some really serious problems in the last few years with their software, so I don't know. I'd have to look at their. That is something I am aware of. So at least in this particular case, I know somewhat the business, and I use Unity. I've used it. I don't particularly like some of the things that they had issues with, so it doesn't surprise me that they're kind of sitting on lower lug positions over the last 2 years. They had some really big problems with Unity. I feel like it was like 3 years ago, so it's probably back here, 2022. That sounds about right. It's a game development system platform, and it is, I think it's free. I mean, you can go use it. You might have to do certain things. There's a lot of community resources for it. I don't know what it's really valuable, like whether or not it's really valuable long term is hard to say. It's kind of like, what was that other one that people use? Well, Unity's kind of all encompassing, but Unity also lets you do stuff for like web-based design and other things. It's like 2D and 3D. It doesn't do a lot. I think it doesn't model. I don't think they have modeling, but they allow you to import this like characters and animations and stuff. It's basically a way of organizing the game data that you already have into a program. Instead of you having to code, it allows you to use it to program. It's a little different than like Unreal Engine or something, which builds environments and junk. Unity doesn't really do that. You guys are like, yes, it does. Well, I don't know if it does, because last time I used it was for a game development project I was on for a couple years, and that's as much as I used it, so. It's not looking great. I mean, this isn't really looking that good. It kind of looks like it's distributing. There's a lot of volume here. It's a little muddy. It could be that this was an auto reaction, phase B top, and then this is going into a spring. But it's not recovering very much like a spring. And then the other problem is this first auto reaction, which really comes after the selling climax, is met by a lower low, which is usually a bit weak. And then you see the same pattern on the opposite side. Double top, double bottom here, double top here. So I think there's an issue of this is having some difficulty. It could just be distributing. And if that's the case, this could just be a LSPY. So just a bear flag, basically. So a bit of a dangerous play here because, yeah, like I could see why this might be appealing. It's recovered from these lows at 13. But it just looks like a widening. Yeah, if you wanted to trade it, you could probably trade into earnings. I don't really know why it's getting beat down so much. It's still making money. I've seen a lot worse from, or a lot better from a lot worse companies. So it may just be that there's software issues. I don't know. Or just the people don't think that it's going to be valuable. For whatever reason, there's competition with AI and junk now. That wasn't there before. If I were going to trade it, I'd probably look at this like a wedge trade and then like consider where it's at on the bottom and did it push through the bottom here. If it did, it's not really a great sign, but you know, potential here to kind of run back up a good bit. Even on like a 50% retrace, I think it might be beneficial. You could consider that a possibility, coming back to 24, 2350, 2360. Something like that. It's hard to say. Yeah. That seems about right. So if I were going to trade it, I would say that maybe, again, maybe if you wanted to trade it, you could trade the breakout on the, it's your choice. You can trade whatever you want to trade, guys. But if this is interesting to you, you could perhaps trade this breakout if it comes back up to like 25. I think it might try one more time to get back above this top. I got to be honest though, to me it would look more bearish than bullish. I know it looked kind of looked like it's outside the trend there, but it's made these tops before and just sold off. So that's probably what I would expect here, is that this is going to have some kind of a pump on earnings. And if it does hold, sure, you know, maybe back up to 30. And if it doesn't, I think you're going to just see it kind of capitulate finally and really drop. I think it's probably going to go all the way back down to this floor at 15 to start. And then there's a gap down here below. So I hate to say it, but it might be one of those things where this is a very positive company, but maybe they didn't do enough to prove like a longer term worth. Maybe they're kind of settling into a their standardized, not adjusted one was kind of low. Maybe they're not doing enough to kind of prove that they're worth more as a company. So maybe that this company, Unity, in and of itself, is valuable especially for people that are doing like indie games who want a free platform. And it may end up being like the lead platform that's used in the long term. We don't know. But is it worth, $100 a share? Maybe not. The company just may not be that valuable. So not everything like about a company selling off may be very as negative as expected, I suppose is the right word. Maybe this is just trying to find the right range to trade in. And once it kind of gets there, it'll, see if it can go up or down for a bit. I would say it's doing a little bit of that right now. This might be that key zone right here at $22, actually. It wouldn't surprise me. Long term, if this trades at like 22, I think that's reasonable. So, because that would be the cat ear kind of setup. So it looks like $9.99, $10 a share, probably is in view. To me, this looks like, again, it looks like that kind of cat ear setup, like 1 and then 2. So it might be a minute before I can kind of get all the way there, but I don't know. Maybe it's worth $10 a share. I don't know. And if something changes, it would change right here, because in order for this to continue advancing, it has to break and hold above this guy. So it won't be, again, I always say like it won't be a secret, but that's just my way of saying it should be fairly obvious if it comes back up here that this is ready to go. And until that point, I don't really think there's much here to confirm upside. There's just a lot of potential for fall through. I'm seeing a lot of signals that might be a little bit bearish. So that's my take on it. Some of this is just guesswork, so don't go too crazy with, well, he said it was going to go up to whatever, and yeah, some of it's just guesswork. I mean, you're really looking at maybe that head and shoulder type deal, and then it's technically just a widening. If it breaks down, it's just a widening breakdown, so that goes back to the beginning targets, which are down here, and then beyond that at 15, and then beyond that, you're just kind of looking at the major structure here. It just seems like the natural way to go down to 10. It's measured out pretty evenly. The rest of this is just me talking about reactions and other stuff. And you'd expect there to be a reaction back up here at some point, so on and so forth. And things can change. I mean, if, for example, something happened and this came back down and it did get near the double bottom, I mean, this could end up becoming like a wave 1 of 3. And I mean, if you get down to this point and it breaks out later, let's say it does come across, this could end up being like some kind of massive move later on. But it's not at that point yet where I feel like it's ready to go. And if it went, I'd be like, oh, that's weird, I was way wrong. I was way wrong about that. You guys are like, yeah, but look at the RSI, man. I mean, it's more bullish in some ways if it's not oversold, and going into earnings, that's a good thing. But that doesn't mean it can't go down again. I think there's a way to kind of take it down right here. If this is the M cross, for example, where it's positioning itself to potentially come back up and try to hit 28s or whatever. And that's what I was saying. Maybe we can get up to 25s or something like that without too much trouble. If this kept widening, again, you would know, because it would push up right here. So it's not going to be hidden. But certainly this could be a cat, I could call it a cat ear, right? A cat ear kind of setup where it pushes up and then spends some time distributing and then comes back down again. It's not even really that complex. So, you know, like that. Okay, I'm done. I gotta go. It's time for food, and I gotta do my martial arts practice today, and get to do some animation work today too. I mean, there's nothing else I really want to say about AMC right now. I mean, it'd have to come back up above 350 at this point to make me think it's really bullish. Like, it's likely you're going to get some kind of a hook type reaction here that could come back up near 350. Certainly a possibility. It could break out of a local downtrend and try to kind of have like a move back up to 350 again. But you're outside that. I still think it's going to come back at this point down or sideways, something. I'd have to look at it closer. I'll try to update on Discord later. All right, guys, we'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.